There's one last dimension that is probably the most obvious change that has happened through art is that now art can be done digitally, and therefore we can make art using new methods that were not previously available. That also means that perhaps we can use those previously available methods to represent this art in different ways. As you can see from this leaflet from a museum exhibit, Television's Impact on Contemporary Art. Because the digital technologies are now part of our daily environment, they are also part of the things that we consider in part of our world. And therefore, if we see our world as a technological extensions of ourselves, we are also seeing the representations of this technological world around us. And if we can, for example, in this cartoon here, paint the content of a television screen as an artistic practice, we can also think of the content of a television screen as part of our daily existence and what makes our life different through these digital means. And that is obviously not new or unique even to the modern age that we live in. An entire pan of the art history as we know it has been inspired by the industrial development and industrialized methods of creating things, everything, because it went pretty quickly from the point of view of historians and from the point of view of philosophers, even that you might be able to create new things and call these things art, create these things in a machinery way or in a digital way eventually that would be called art compared to the paintings that required skill and training and a very specific sensibility that usually or previously would not necessarily have been available. Example here of art critic who is telling us about our new view of the world or a new comprehension of the world through the arts that existed during his time. So John Ruskin, kind of kind of a well-rounded intellectual, if you will, did a bunch of things, but was mostly focused on the art for quite a while. At least at the end of the 19th century, became very influential with people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. People who had heard of him eventually became very enamored with him. In the spirit which has become the habit of his mind, and in the hope that neither his zeal nor his usefulness may be checked by the withdrawal of an hour, even those things which seem mechanical, indifferent, or contemptible depend for their perfection upon the knowledge, the acknowledgement of faith, truth, obedience, for which it has become the occupation of his life to contend. So people are changing by their presence of their existence in the presence of technology or technological means, and things that might have been mechanical, indifferent, contemptible before can be improved, can be skillfully used to become a little bit more than a mechanical means. And as a result of that, there is this feeling or this impetus to keep the human at the center of artistic creation that a machine would, at least as far as Rustin was concerned in the middle of the 19th century, a machine would never be able to do anything close to what a human could do. And it would require, or a machine would essentially require a human to make anything close to art the way that you might have seen it before. And that's because, as far as Ruskin was concerned, the way that we are practicing art has to do a lot with our politics, our history, maybe our faith and our belief in God or some kind of a higher power. And those things are not teachable to a machine. To this day, probably are not, but certainly were not during his time. So having these very specific human sensibilities is, as far as he was concerned, what allowed us to make art. And he became a pioneer of what became known as the arts and crafts movement in the UK. mostly a fine art, decorative art that started in Great Britain and spread to the United States, mostly based on these very small, intricate, sensible designs that again would not be able to be recreated by a machine. That you very much required a human hand to make them. And Ruskin tells us something that we might have heard in a somewhat different version previously in this class. No changing of place at 100 miles per an hour will make us one whit stronger or happier or wiser. There was always more in the world than man could see, walked they ever so slowly. They will see it no better for going fast. The really precious things are thought and sight, not pace. It does a bullet no good to go fast, and a man, if he be truly a man, no harm to go slow, for his glory is not at all in going, but in being. And in a way that Ruskin was seeing it, the industrialist movement in Britain was really turning people into machines themselves, that the machinery or operating machinery would turn people into people operating machines and being a little bit more obedient, a little bit more or a little bit less thoughtful, really, and less invested, really, in making stuff that is good, that is beautiful, that is essentially unique. They will be more interested in profit, more interested in repetition, more interested in the very mechanical functions that are available to them. And there is a pretty good argument to be made regarding this influence of our artistic means and our technology, because the availability of certain paint colors or the availability of certain tools, which is now very widespread, has created all kinds of new forms of art, which especially previous generations to ours tend to have very little regard for. That it is not as unique as they might have thought, or it is not as beautiful as they might have thought, etc. And perhaps this is just a result of being in different eras, of existing in different times, and going through different paces in some way or another. Another Another article by Ruskin points out, sometime since I put myself on record as an antagonist of the devil's own toy, the bicycle. I want to reiterate with all the emphasis of strong language that I condemn all manner of buy, try, and 4, 5, 6, or 7 cycles. Any contrivance or invention intended to supersede the use of human feet on God's own ground is damnable. Walking, running, leaping, and dancing are legitimate and natural joys of the body, and every attempt to stride on stilts, dangle on ropes, or wiggle on wheels is an affront to the Almighty. You can't improve on God's appointed way of walking by substituting an improved cartwheel. So yeah, obviously is getting a little bit grumpier towards his later years. I think Ruskin died in 1900, actually, or just a few years during when this was written. So, this is an old man yelling at a cloud, essentially. I think he must have been 80 or 80 years old. And so the observation, or the evolution of the world as he saw it in his lifetime, essentially from the early 19th century to the late 19th century, the slow growth and slow expansion of industrial machinery to pretty much every realm of life made him very resentful of every new invention that could come in. And as a result of that, of course, kind of retreating to the more reactionary religious reasoning for defeating the point of God's intended place for humans, if you will. And again, if you think of artistic production as some kind of inspired mode of creation, and that inspiration could come from anything, but typically speaking, when we think of inspiration, it comes from nature, it comes from somewhat of a supernatural force, whether embodied in a god or not. It comes in the shape of much more generally complex forms of existence, and as a result of that, whether or not we are able to supersede God's creation, in this case, walking, but maybe in the case of the cartwheel, if the wheel was given to humans by God, then why do people need to improve the number of wheels, etc.? You could explain that to a much larger sense of the concepts we have talked about in this class before, like improving your health. And again, making humans immortal through technology, which would be the ultimate defeat of God. That would be the ultimate affront to people like Ruskin and probably quite a bit of humans today. And again, right, the conversation becomes one of being. Whether we are the same people and whether we are living in the same manner is obviously a much larger discussion than what we could answer in the context of digital anthropology. But it is interesting to compare this to the earlier attempts that people have made to conceive of art as a complex production that is created by these active agents that are the humans. Here from Emerson, usually part of a movement that we call transcendentalism. So a person who accepts that. That life is more than what you can see. Essentially, that that things that are religious tends to transcend into other realms of life, and that there is no little box system to put everything in. Emerson says the one thing in the world of value is the active soul. Is this every man is entitled to this every man contains within him, although in almost all men obstructed and as yet unborn, the soul active sees absolute truth and utters truth or creates. In this action it is genius, not the privilege of here and there a favorite, but the sound estate of every man. In its essence it is progressive. And in this case here, the seeing that knowledge comes through intuition, imagination, and kind of again thinking outside of the box rather than logic, rather than pre-established schemes, rather than just imitation, of course, is very much something that has been typically associated with these larger modes of thinking, and certainly antithetical to thinking with machines, because machines by themselves reproduce, they imitate, they connect things that are very logicals, and as a result of that, they are limited by it in a way that Emerson says here, obstructed. So if humans have the possibility of using their active brain, their active soul to create things that are more than mechanical, then not just the objects, but the relationship that we established with the objects is what allows us to progress, to move forward, and perhaps to create a form of art. And by the 20th century, we realized this even more so because the Industrial Revolution has taken hold, and it seems like this is not going to be a fad. This is not going to be a passing fancy of mankind, that machines are in everything and everywhere. Yet there is a new vocabulary now to talk about art. It's a vocabulary that has to contend with this technology. It says that now technologies are part of our world, so much so that art has to be thought of in terms of its technical abilities. And the human who is intent on making a form of art has to be able to compete with a machine, has to be more than a reproducer, more than a mechanical producer. It has to be somebody who can go past this basic machinery or machine-like capacity. And this is obviously certainly more true today now that we have machines like computers that can create very accurate representation of images, some that could be confusing to others. We've talked about deepfakes, for example. We have here a very simple optical problem. To see a thing, we must adjust our visual apparatus in a certain way. If the adjustment is inadequate, the thing is seen indistinctly or not at all. Take a garden seen through a window. Looking at the garden, we adjust our eyes in such a way that the ray of vision travels through the pane without delay and rests on the shrubs and the flowers. Since we are focusing on the garden and our ray of vision is directed toward it, we do not see the window but look clear through it. The purer the glass, the less we see it. But we can also deliberately disregard the garden and, withdrawing the ray of vision, detain it at the window. We then lose sight of the garden. What we still behold of it is a confused mass of color which appears pasted at the pane. Hence, to see the garden and to see the window pane are two incompatible operations which exclude one another because they require different adjustments. So this is by Jose Ortega y Gasset, a Spanish philosopher, or again, kind of a intellectual, very widely trained and very interested in a variety of ways, and also very much concerned with the existence of people within this new developing world, and especially in the early 20th century Spain, as the political changes go from a monarchy to a republic to a dictatorship, and kind of through very difficult times for the Spanish people. And the system that he is developing here is to have this reality kind of radically redefined as your life and your surroundings, and whether or not your eyes are going to stop at the window or are going to look at the garden means that you have this possibility as a person to feed your brain and to have this interaction that goes, if you will, up until the window to see the colors and the light, but also could go past it and see the garden and see the flowers. And those two things are different adjustments that are incompatible, but they are working together because you see through one to the other. And therefore, if you focus too much on one or the other, you're missing the beauty that is to make a very transparent glass, or the beauty that is to make a very beautiful garden. Either way, you are stopping yourself at one form of technology, whether it is a technology created by nature slash God slash this artificial construct that we have to think of gardens, or the technology that we think of made by people, that is the glass, which is using minerals that are available in nature, but to create this thing that protects us from the elements. So again, the artistic vision that is provided to us through technology has to be thought of not as an end in and of itself, but as another new development in our lives.